Hello, everyone, tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And it is on my mind, as I'm sure it is on all of your minds, still the power and impact of what we experienced yesterday in our nation's capital. And if you were as frightened and heartbroken as I was, I know that our executive director, Mark Reynolds, has written a statement that's been published on our blog and shared via email to our whole network that I'm also highlighting here tonight to honor before we begin tonight, given that many of our minds might not be immediately on the topic at hand. So I just want to name that and provide this as a resource, and also pass on that all of us in the CCL family are here for working together right now. And so please feel free to reach out to any of us as we navigate this time together. But we're here tonight to gather around really learning from each other in how we as CCL leaders have been organizing and hosting co-working parties online, primarily through Zoom. And with that, I'd love to just welcome everyone to this weekly webinar program and the chance to join CCL leaders like you and I, looking around the friendly group of faces here tonight that have been innovating with our online group organizing to really help build cohesiveness and action opportunities together as our chapters. So we're going to have a chance to learn from leaders who have helped organize phone banking efforts, Energy Innovation Act Endorse-A-Thons, call Congress parties, you name it, and the experiences and suggestions you have that have really worked for your group to stay creatively connected and productive online during this pandemic. We are going to hear from three wonderful CCL leaders. Debbie, CCL Washington, D.C.'s co-lead, and also a steering committee member of CCL's Climate and Environmental Justice Action Team. We're also going to hear some advice and experience from the wonderful Sharon Begatel, CCL's co-leader for the Engaging Youth Action Team and Missouri State Coordinator, as well as Sarah Karush out of the Fairfax chapter in Virginia. And we are going to focus on just a little bit of background behind co-working to start with, since that is a fun word that's evolving and continuing to pop up in our lexicon culturally. We're going to talk about some specific chapter actions that different groups are taking and really focus on creating that culture of inclusivity with the co-working we can do, and then really think through some specific examples of phone banking, call Congress days, and endorse-a-thons before getting to some brainstorming. So a short history of co-working. This was fascinating to me, actually, and just kind of understanding when we use that term and when we're really trying to apply that with our work with CCL. Co-working has now surpassed over 1 million people worldwide, and that obviously looks quite different in the era of fully online. We're not obviously joining in a lot of physical spaces like we were, but it's really only been around, at least as a concept, for the last 20 years. The earliest mention I could find of it in the modern era was in 1999, pre-millennium, where a German by the name of Bernard de Koven actually kind of tried to combine this new idea of collaborative work with business coordinated by computers. And so really since the very beginning, co-working, at least as a modern term, has really tried to identify that people, whether they're working on business or other nonprofit activities, were too isolated and hierarchical. And so instead, what the whole goal has been of this movement is to really identify collaborative work through a non-competitive approach while giving people the opportunity to work on their own projects. So keep that in mind as we talk about all of these approaches tonight. But I thought that was really helpful just in understanding the concept of co-working outside of even how it's been evolving here with our work in CCL groups. I think that the genesis of a lot of the ideas behind tonight's use of Zoom or other online meeting platforms for co-working has really come from the hard Scrabble work of organizing throughout the lead up to this year's election with CCL volunteer leaders partnering with Environmental Voter Project. And so what I'd like to do is just give a big shout out for those that are on the line and for those that, clearly gave their time and making thousands of calls, spending thousands of hours from CCL coast to coast. I know we had leadership in the Northeast. I know that we had leadership in Georgia. I know we had leadership throughout the DC and coastal chapters and in California. So this is a screenshot that I know that the Environmental Voter Project CCL leaders gave a window into leading up to this most recent Georgia runoff. You can see all the different groups, all the different leaders that were involved in really coordinating the text and phone banking shifts. And I just want to acknowledge the impact that they made, as well as the hard work in really creating a new approach that all of us can learn from in our own chapter work. And what I also learned, I guess, in interviewing and talking to a whole bunch of CCL leaders that have been trying to use Zoom or other online platforms to do good co-working is the following three real principles, or just kind of conditions in which co-working is probably going to be most likely to be successful for your own group. And that is that it's going to be action oriented. So no one's just sitting around and talking or philosophizing the whole time. They're actually kind of there to work. And as they're working, they know that they're arriving to work on a clearly defined and focused task. So it could be something short like making a call, but it could be a bite by bite, step by step of a larger task too, like developing an email script for your outreach to grassroots groups, or having a workshop around an LTE that you're writing. You name it. It's a whole variety of levels of complexity, but you want to be able as leader to develop a bite by bite way to focus those subtasks. And then the other key element is just the structure that combines you as veteran or whoever it is in your chapter that is kind of practicing, the expert model of somebody that's already done this and imparting wisdom or training with newish volunteers. And again, co-working as it originated was meant to, flatten that hierarchy so that we're all learning together. And I think CCL is a perfect example of that. It's not like there's just a teacher and a student. We're all learning from each other with that philosophy. So working out the logistics, there's a lot of themes out there and a lot of ways to do this, but here are four big tips that really were part of a lot of the interviews that we've done. You want to think through how you can make joining that meeting as frictionless as possible. So just a simple link that you embed, or again, creating the clear details that you're going to get out and communicate so that people know how to join and you're not spending your whole time helping people find where you're at. You also want to make sure to use whatever your group organizing tools allow to basically save the date, post the advertisement, the invitation to your group's forum, email your group, however you get the word out. If you do use social media, obviously making sure with that save the date, give a link to the forum or the event that you're discussing on CCL community, since those are all login protected. But making sure to communicate that a couple times and then one last time the day of as well is always helpful. You also want to make sure to keep the scope of your work short and focused ahead of time. And so people know ahead of time what they should be bringing to work on. For groups that did have kind of a broader approach, I think that the findings, at least of late, have been that it's not as successful or highly attended as a clearly delineated one task that everyone's working on collectively. Those have tended, at least for CCL groups, to yield higher participation and activity. And then lastly, there's a variety of approaches out there between those that have tried keeping everyone in the same room, and basically the main meeting room is used as a troubleshooting support open hotline, and people can basically mute their computer or their phone when they're busy doing their own calls or their own writing if they don't want to hear a discussion, but then they can also unmute to share and ask for help of the leaders if they're running into a roadblock or they just had a call that they'd like to process, you name it. Other groups have actually used breakouts for that, depending on interests. But again, there's no one model whether or not you want to use that main space overall, and encourage people just to mute as they're doing the work and only unmute as they have questions, or if you want to basically farm people out into breakout rooms. So what I'd like to do here is just take a step back too and focus on, with this short little interview I have with Debbie featured here, the power of just intentionally using Zoom as a welcoming space, regardless of whether it's co-working or not. And I think Debbie does a wonderful job in our interview of really highlighting these three areas that I've identified, but I'll let her speak to this here. And so I'll let Debbie speak to a lot of this with her own words, and just want to affirm again the group culture and the approach that she's taken to really building out a team in helping do phone banking to invite fellow CCL members to the next monthly meeting. Debbie, take it away.
Hi, my name is Debbie Chang. I am a co-leader in the Washington, D.C. chapter. I also serve on the action team for climate and environmental justice in CCL. I'm on the steering committee. But I think one of the most important things is when you're doing phone banking, it's challenging to get a good shift. And it's very helpful when the group's successes are your success. And it's usual that, like, you know, some people in a group will have a good experience, and we try to make it so that that's everybody's win, because it is a numbers game. So that's one of the good reasons to do the phone bankings as a group. Plus, if there are questions, there's someone there to support. And if there's good things, you can cheerlead each other. And if there's bad things, there's people to support each other. And that's why it's really helpful to have the phone bank as a group. The other thing is, we strongly encourage people to use the chat box for side conversations. When you're in a personal meeting, like, you might be able to pass notes to the person next to you. You might say, hey, what does CF&D stand for? And they can tell you. You can't do that really easily in a Zoom meeting. You also can't really interrupt each other. Zoom kind of is one diva, one mic. If you talk over someone else, it makes it hard for someone else to hear. So even your background noise can cut out the speaker sound for a third person. So we really encourage using the chat box. And I might even private message somebody who I know is newer or whose first time is there. Say, hey, new person, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Like, it doesn't mess with the flow. And then we've got people monitoring the chat so that they can answer each other. And we can use the chat to, like, encourage each other, to say, like, oh, totally agree. Or to ask questions that are dumb, like, what is HR 763 again? We say a lot, people come for the cause. People come for the cause of climate change. They stay for the community that they find. So are they being valued as people beyond their value to CCL? So make the time to have those transformational relationships.
All right, so I know that was just a little glimmer, but I think that gives a great window in, and I love hearing the chat discussion around this too, just right now, modeling this, that even though with Zoom there is a one diva, one mic limitation often with that interaction audibly, chat conversation allows people to stack, and really with co-working where you're training, you're doing action steps, really being able to support each other in that work and troubleshooting, especially if you've got a larger team collectively working on something at the same time. One great approach that was highlighted with our chapters throughout Virginia, really spearheaded by Sarah in Fairfax, was this past December's Call Congress campaign. They had basically a whole day-long series of different events. And I'll let Sarah take it away from here to walk through how CCL Virginia got their Call Congress party set up and the vision behind it being guided.
Basically, we were looking for a way to get people a little bit more excited about the Call Congress Day. And we thought, we could have a fun little event and make it pretty casual, where people could drop in. And what we thought was that way we can have some activities going on, but they can be casual activities and people can ask their questions. If they have specific questions about the bill or about how to make these calls, then we would be there to answer them.
It was 5 different activities throughout the different hours, and all of them basically invited people to join climate trivia, climate humor, some element of fun, and then paired it with calling Congress so that people had both a social element and a chance to take action as a co-working space in calling Congress and processing how their calls went. And so I thought that was an incredibly creative approach that really kind of brought people in throughout the day, depending on their work or other family commitments, and really still created that community as an opportunity to invite action and that space together. And then I also wanted to highlight nearby with the Endorse-A-Thon effort that took place just a little further down in North Carolina. Sharon Begatel really got to share a little bit more in her interview about the endorsement challenge that they set up. You can see here this effort, they called it the Low Hanging Fruit in Abundance Challenge, a 100-day endorsement challenge for Raleigh-Durham. in 100 endorsements in 100 days. So they basically had identified as a group that a lot of their chapter members, they have a large group, but a lot of them felt intimidated by the idea of knowing where to start to have kind of that first ask with making an endorsement request. So I'll let Sharon take it away from here to really review some of the big takeaways and learnings that their team had from their Endorse-A-Thon.
Our low-hanging fruit campaign, while we didn't reach our stretch goal, it actually accomplished a huge goal for Grasstop's work, and that was making Grasstop's endorsements much more accessible to a broader number of people within our chapter. So it took away that I can't do this that's something that's far out there and only for people who are willing to go talk to CEOs. But this brought it home to people and just made it more accessible. And they got to think in a way like, oh yeah, I'm thinking endorsements. I'm thinking about it in that way. And that was a big shift, is having that coming more to people's awareness, consciousness, and actually stepping into action.
So those are some great examples, but I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot out there outside of what we've explored, and I'd love for tonight to really also be a brainstorming and sharing time. But before we get to Q&A, let's close out with some important thoughts to really reflect on. And that is, after you've had your event, whether it is an event to call Congress, to invite fellow CCL members to attend the next meeting, to have another lever of political will focus from LTEs to Grasstop strategy, when you're done, make sure to build space in for processing as your co-working group at the end. What did people like? What did people learn? What did people think that could be improved on for next time? Really being intentional before departing, just to have, even if it's a quick little 5-minute snap check-in as the facilitator, to really build on and continue to refine that experience to improve for your chapter. We also want to recommend practice before you log off with logging your actions in the action tracker right on CCL Community. And just as a note, all of the links that we're including to the information from the Endorse-A-Thon to the Call Congress Party, all of that's going to be provided in the liner notes. And we'll make sure to put the action tracker link as well there. But that'll get people practicing, making sure that all of the activity that we are capturing across all of our groups is being tracked, coordinated, and helps to make the case that we are building the political will for effective solutions like carbon fee and dividend policies. We also want to encourage you to keep experimenting, be creative. What's working with your group? If something that you tried didn't work the first time, that's okay. Keep innovating and try again, maybe adding a new element or a different focus the next time, and let us know what you found to be successful. And it's also okay to start small. Some groups maybe only are going to have 1 or 2 people show up, and that's still effective co-working. You don't have to feel like a failure if you only have a couple of partners show up with you for your co-working. In fact, most of the groups we talked to only had a few people show up, and that's all right. You don't need to have a large group to be effective. So with that, let's close tonight again. Here's my email. We'd love to hear your stories. And if you would like to share in the forums, here's the link to those forums where you can share what's worked for your chapter with co-working. We'd love to hear more. And at this point, we are so grateful for all the people that reached out and already shared their story. It was an honor to highlight a lot of these examples throughout the country. And we look forward to more co-working together, everyone. So stay safe out there. And thank you again for joining us tonight, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizens Climate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.